members that there will be a second round of questions. One thing we know for sure is I suspect this hearing will be on a lot of PEG channels throughout the country, and you guys are going to be huge stars. Mr. Visclosky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First request I would have is to enter into the record a one-page letter from Sheriff David E. Lane, who is Sheriff of Porter County, Indiana.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. First question I have for Mr. Sy is, has AT&T requested a waiver for the emergency alert system?
I believe that it has.
What is the status of that request?
You know, I apologize. I don't recall off the top of my head, but I will get back to you on that.
Do you know why the company made that request for emergency alert system for a waiver?
I do not. I just don't have that information, but I will get back to you on that.
You will provide that for the record and what the status is?
Sure.
Okay. Is it Simmons? Simons. I'm sorry, Mr. Simons. It's interesting. My colleague from New York mentioned that he had a parochial question, and Ms. Kilpatrick also referenced a situation in Michigan. I think if every member of Congress was here, they'd have a parochial interest, which I think really evidences the broad-ranging problems and concerns people have with cable and with access. What happens to the constituent in, say, southern Indiana that I don't represent who doesn't know Mr. Dingell? What happens to somebody who has a complaint who doesn't, and they don't have Mr. Dingell to go to bat for them to get a problem solved?
Well, Congressman, I think that while the Dearborn case has been well publicized, it is not the norm. I take your point about, you know, not everybody can call up Chairman Dingell. But I think given the number and nature of cable systems out there, the challenges that attend the digital transition, while there are complaints, and I don't want to minimize them, they are not widespread to the point where people are losing these channels everywhere. I think things are changing. Technology is changing. I know you're putting Sheriff Lane's letter into the record, and I heard Barbara talk about that. But in Indiana, for instance, under the state law, local governments are charged with taking over the public access business, and Comcast offered to turn its facilities over to local governments, and so far they have no takers.
And I'll follow up on that in a minute. Is Verizon a member of your association?
No, it is not.
It's not, so I can't ask my rhetorical question.
I'd be happy to speak on behalf of Verizon.
Let me then reference a couple of your comments in your opening statement. You mentioned that the cable industry has long been a supporter of PEG programming. For over 30 years, cable operators have spent millions of dollars each year to construct the local studios and other facilities necessary to produce this programming. This commitment of channel capacity, funding, and assistance ensures that all members of the community can stay in touch with town meetings and other activities of their local government and take advantage of tutoring or other community education programs. The good news for PEG programmers today is that cable intends to continue its commitment. The state of Indiana, talking about state law changes, and you referenced the state of Indiana, passed House Bill 1279, signed into law in 2006. On August 28, 2007, Comcast sent letters to municipalities, as you rightfully point out, in Northwest Indiana, claiming there was no provision within the bill requiring them to provide production playback facilities, even though these had been negotiated in good faith for more than 25 years at the local level. Comcast then demanded that Hammond, Indiana, all these are Indiana communities, Portage, Mishawaka, Valparaiso, Plymouth, Goshen, South Bend, and Elkhart, many of these communities are not in my congressional district, had 30 days to find housing for old facilities, hire staff, and develop a management organization. As of December 15th, Comcast stopped providing playback or local programming in these cities. These cities that I'm familiar, they're broke. We have a property tax problem. We have job loss in our community. They're broke. Last time I looked, Comcast's making a lot of money. Isn't there some public responsibility where there's a public franchise?
Yes, there's clearly a public responsibility. And
why is it lacking with Comcast in northern Indiana? These communities encompass the entire northern part of the state of Indiana, and they pulled the rug out of them in 30 days.
Well, Congressman, the cable industry didn't ask the state legislatures to change the law, and they did.
Oh, don't say that. Don't say that. I would suggest that is not a correct statement, to be polite.
Well, they didn't.
And the fact that now they're not required to do something doesn't mean they don't have a public obligation to do something.
I take that point, Congressman, but we do provide service in a competitive environment. And if our competitors are able to forego these costs, these obligations, it puts us in a disadvantage. If Indiana wants to change the law back and treat everybody equally, but these are obligations, as you point out, Comcast had undertaken and its predecessor companies had undertaken for 2 decades. So, but for a change in the law, they would have continued. We can't compete against Verizon and AT&T if they're not going to undertake these obligations, and we're expected to do so. They're bigger companies. You talk about Comcast being a big, rich company. AT&T alone is bigger than the entire cable industry, and Comcast is, and any other cable company that wants to continue these obligations in the face of laws that eliminate them is in tough shape competitively. We're losing customers to AT&T and Verizon are vigorously competing for our customers.
Hey, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just picking up on your comment, Mr. Visclosky, I just, not wanting to give you a hard time, but something tells me that these laws do not get changed without the cable industry not being at the table or being aware of it or lobbying against it if they don't like it. You made it sound like it was done, in spite of what you might have wanted.
Well, I didn't mean to suggest that. Clearly, once the legislative ball got rolling, cable participated in the process, but cable didn't go to the Indiana legislature and ask for these changes. And in fact,
Mr. Chairman, if I could, that is a correct statement. But my point is, you are a major corporate entity, and the fact now that the law was changed and there's not a requirement, you took advantage of it.
Yeah. That's right. And again, I think it's tough. You look back at the history of Comcast and its predecessor company's commitment in Indiana and elsewhere, and you look at the change in the law, for all video service providers. We compete against these other providers, and it becomes tough to maintain a costly obligation in the face of a regulatory environment in which our competitors do not take it on. It's just, a fact of market under those kind of regulations.